She thought she was helping a lonely little boy heal from his trauma. But what she didn't know was that his nightmares were tied to a woman everyone believed was dead. One night, when the thunder roared and the music box started playing by itself, everything changed. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching? The chandeliers shimmered like captured stars above the grand ballroom, reflecting off polished marble floors and glittering champagne glasses. Beneath the elegance, soft music floated through the air, blending with the laughter of the rich and powerful. Waiters moved like shadows between conversations worth millions, but for one woman among them, it all felt like a dream she didn't belong in. Emily Carter adjusted the crisp white apron over her black uniform, her heart pounding. It was her third week working at the Hayden estate, and tonight the household buzzed with importance. The CEO of Hayden Robotics, Jonathan Hayden, was hosting his annual Foundation Gala, an event the media called the Night of Innovation and Elegance. But for Emily, it was just another reminder of how far she'd fallen. Once upon a time, she had been a music therapist. She had spent her days surrounded by children. Children who didn't speak but sang in their own ways, who didn't look you in the eyes but connected through rhythm, laughter, and gentle melodies. When the funding for her small therapy center collapsed, her world had quieted too. Bills piled up, hope thinned, and a maid job was all she could find. So here she was, walking through a sea of diamonds and arrogance, her hands trembling slightly as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes. She had promised herself she would just get through the night, serve, smile, survive. But fate had other plans. Near the far corner of the hall, away from the swirl of silk gowns and tuxedos, sat a small figure. A boy, no older than 5. His tiny legs dangled off the edge of a velvet chair, his hands pressed against his ears. He wore a formal navy suit, but his face was turned toward the floor, his gaze fixed on the light patterns dancing across it. Around him, people flowed like a river around a stone, noticing, avoiding, pretending not to see. Emily slowed her pace. The boy looked lost, not in the way a child gets lost in a crowd, but in the way a soul gets lost in noise too loud for its heart. She whispered to a passing server, "Who's that little boy?" The man gave a dismissive shrug. "Mr. Hayden's son, Ethan. Don't talk to him. He doesn't respond to anyone. Some condition. The boss doesn't like when staff interfere." The man walked off before she could ask more, but Emily didn't need the explanation. She recognized it. The small, repetitive rocking, the avoidance of eye contact, the hands covering the ears. Ethan wasn't broken. He was overwhelmed. Her chest tightened as she watched a woman in diamonds nearly bump into his chair, frown, and walk away like he wasn't even there. No one looked twice. Not even Jonathan Hayden himself, who stood across the room, the center of attention, tall, commanding, the kind of man whose presence filled the room. Cameras flashed around him. He smiled the kind of smile that was practiced, not real. Emily looked back at the boy. His lips were moving silently, whispering a rhythm only he could hear. And suddenly, she remembered one of her students, a little girl who used to hum to herself during thunderstorms. The world was too loud, so she made her own music. Emily set down her tray on a side table, ignoring the curious glances of the other servers. Slowly, she walked toward the corner, step by step, not too fast, not too close. She didn't want to startle him. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "That chandelier's beautiful, isn't it?" "Looks like tiny stars." Ethan didn't answer. His rocking slowed just slightly. That was something. Emily knelt a few feet away, keeping her tone calm and low. "You know, when I was little, I used to stare at lights like that too. I thought if I looked long enough, I could find the rhythm hiding inside." Still no reply, but his fingers stopped tapping against his knees. He was listening. That was enough reason to keep going. She tilted her head toward the music drifting through the hall, a slow, classical waltz. "Do you like music?" she asked. "It's a bit loud, I know, but there's something soft beneath it if you really listen." Ethan blinked, then softly hummed, just one note, fragile as a feather. Emily's heart lifted. "That's lovely," she whispered. "You can hear the rhythm, can't you?" "I can too," she hummed with him, matching his tone. Slowly, their sounds merged, a quiet harmony hidden beneath the grand orchestra of the ballroom. To everyone else, it was invisible. To them, it was everything. Then Emily extended her hand, not too fast, not too close. "Would you like to dance with me? Just here, no one else. Just us." The boy's eyes flicked to her hand. For the first time, he looked at her. Really looked. His eyes were deep grey, like rain clouds before a storm. There was hesitation there, but also curiosity. After a few seconds that felt like forever, he nodded. Emily stood and stepped back a little, letting him decide how to move. She swayed gently to the music, keeping the rhythm simple, safe. Ethan hesitated, then imitated her, a small movement, a half-turn. She smiled. "That's it. Perfect." They began to move together, slowly, softly, like whispers of motion in the farthest corner of the glittering hall. Emily didn't care about the watching eyes, though she felt them. The servers had paused. Some guests were turning their heads confused. But in that small circle of light, nothing else mattered. Ethan spun once, just a small spin, his lips parting in something close to laughter. Emily laughed too, quiet, genuine, a sound that made her eyes sting. The boy mirrored her laughter. For a moment, the world stopped being loud. Then silence rippled through the ballroom. The music hadn't stopped, but the conversations had. All eyes turned toward the unlikely pair in the corner. The billionaire CEO, Jonathan Hayden, froze mid-sentence, his gaze locked on his son, dancing, smiling, alive. The noise around him blurred into nothing. Emily only noticed the shift when she saw a shadow move across the floor. Jonathan was walking toward them, slow but certain, the crowd parting for him. His expression was unreadable, something between disbelief and restrained emotion. Ethan didn't notice. He was still humming, his small hands clinging to Emily's fingers as they spun one last time. When the song ended, he stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "For dancing." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she returned the hug gently. "Anytime," she murmured. "You're a wonderful dancer." Then the air changed. The towering figure of Jonathan Hayden stopped a few steps away. The warmth in Emily's chest turned cold. She straightened, aware of the dozens of eyes watching. "Miss Carter," Jonathan said quietly, his tone firm but not loud. "May I have a word with you?" The room seemed to hold its breath. The other servers froze. Someone turned the music down even lower. Emily nodded, her throat dry. "Of course, sir." Jonathan's gaze flickered briefly to his son, still smiling faintly, his hands now clapping to the fading rhythm. There was something raw in the CEO's eyes, something he quickly masked as he turned and gestured for Emily to follow. Every step out of that ballroom felt like walking toward her own ending. She had broken the unspoken rule. She had touched the one person she wasn't supposed to. The boy everyone ignored, except her. As the grand doors closed behind them, the sound of the gala faded into a dull hum. Emily braced herself, heart pounding, as Jonathan led her down a quiet hallway lined with portraits and gold-trimmed mirrors. He opened the door to his private study and stepped aside, his face unreadable. "Inside," he said gently. Emily hesitated for a moment, then walked in, expecting anger, dismissal, maybe even humiliation. But when she turned around, she didn't see fury, she saw tears. Jonathan Hayden, the man who could command boardrooms and build empires, was standing silently, his jaw tight, his eyes glistening. "How?" he whispered, voice breaking. "How did you do that?" Emily blinked. "Do what, sir?" He took a shaky breath. "He hasn't spoken to anyone. He doesn't look at me. He doesn't smile. And then you, a stranger, you walk in and suddenly he's dancing." His voice cracked on the last word. Emily's heart softened. "I didn't fix him, Mr. Hayden. He was never broken. I just listened to the rhythm he was already hearing." Jonathan stared at her, searching her face for something. Reason, logic, explanation. But there was none. There was only truth, quiet and simple. For the first time that night, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was healing. Outside the study, the gala music swelled again. But inside, everything had changed, though neither of them fully understood just how much. And in the ballroom, little Ethan sat quietly on the chair where he'd danced, tapping his fingers to a rhythm no one else could hear, except one woman who dared to listen. Emily stood frozen in Jonathan Hayden's private study, unsure whether to speak or simply disappear into the walls. The air was thick with the scent of cedarwood and tension. Behind the billionaire's polished desk, shelves towered with awards, family portraits, and books, yet everything felt untouched, like a museum of a life too perfect to be real. Jonathan had turned away, facing the window. City lights spilled in, painting his figure in silver outlines. His reflection looked distant, fractured. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of something unspoken. "You said he's not broken." He paused. "That's what you told me." Emily's fingers gripped the edge of her apron. "Yes, sir. He's not. He just sees the world differently." Jonathan let out a slow, shaky breath. "You talk like you know him." "I don't," Emily admitted softly, "but I know the silence he lives in. I've seen children who speak through music, who calm through rhythm. They don't need fixing. They need understanding." Jonathan turned, his eyes searching hers. You worked with children like him before?" "Yes," she nodded. "I was a music therapist before the center shut down. I never thought I'd find myself in a place like this, but maybe fate had a plan." Her words lingered between them, fragile and true. For the first time, Jonathan looked less like a CEO and more like a father who had been silently drowning in guilt. He sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "I've tried everything. Doctors, specialists, private tutors. Nothing worked. He won't talk to me. He won't even let me touch him. And tonight," his voice trembled, "tonight I watched my son dance." Emily hesitated, unsure if it was her place to speak. But her heart wouldn't let her stay silent. Sometimes the key isn't to make them talk. It's to meet them where they already are. Jonathan looked up, something flickering in his gaze. Curiosity, maybe hope. "You think you can help him?" "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I can try. If you'll let me." For a long moment he didn't answer. The ticking clock in the corner filled the silence. Then finally Jonathan nodded once. "Come tomorrow, noon. I want you to spend time with him." Her eyes widened. "Sir, I'm just a maid. I don't think the agency would—" "I'll handle the agency," he interrupted. "From now on, you'll report to me directly." Emily's breath caught. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had only wanted to help the boy for a moment, not become part of their world. But something in Jonathan's voice, something in Ethan's small, brave smile, told her this was the right path. She nodded slowly. "All right, sir." As she turned to leave, Jonathan's voice stopped her. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "thank you for giving me a glimpse of my son I thought I'd lost forever." That night, long after the gala ended and the chandeliers dimmed, Emily lay awake in her small room above the servants' quarters. The sound of Ethan's laughter still echoed in her mind, light and fragile, like wind chimes in the distance. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about how strange life was, how one act of kindness could rewrite a destiny. The next day arrived with golden sunlight and nervous energy. Emily stood outside the Hayden Mansion's garden terrace, clutching her notebook and a small handheld music player, her only surviving tool from her old therapy days. The garden stretched endlessly before her, fountains whispering, birds singing, roses blooming in perfect rows. But she wasn't admiring the beauty. She was looking for Ethan. She found him sitting under a willow tree, his tiny hands busy arranging pebbles in a perfect circle. His back was to her, his movements slow but precise. He didn't notice her approach. "Hey there," she said gently, stopping a few feet away. "Mind if I sit?" He didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. That was enough. She sat down on the grass, careful not to disturb his pattern. "Those look like planets," she said. "Is this your galaxy?" He tilted his head slightly, still not looking at her. Then with a quiet voice he whispered, "Not planets, notes." Emily blinked. "Notes?" He nodded once, pointing to each stone in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, pause. A smile crept across her face. "You're making music with stones." He gave the smallest nod. It was the most she'd seen him communicate, and it filled her chest with warmth. Slowly, she reached for her music player. "Can I show you something?" He didn't say no. She pressed play, and the gentle sound of piano filled the air. Not loud, not overwhelming, just soft enough to dance through the leaves. She tapped her fingers lightly on the grass. "This song is called Finding Light. I used to play it for my students when they were sad." Ethan's head tilted again, listening. Then, without warning, he picked up 2 small sticks from the ground and began tapping them against his knees, not in chaos, but in rhythm. Perfect rhythm. Every beat landed where it belonged, syncing with the melody like he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in another life. Emily's eyes widened. "You have rhythm in your soul," she whispered. For a few moments, they simply existed together, 2 worlds connected by invisible sound waves. She didn't push, didn't ask questions. She just let the music speak for them both. When the song ended, Ethan looked at her, really looked. "Do you hear it too?" he asked, voice trembling with innocence. Emily smiled softly. "Always." He smiled back. A tiny, fleeting thing, but real. From the terrace above, Jonathan Hayden stood silently, watching through the glass doors. His morning coffee had gone cold in his hand. He didn't want to interrupt, didn't want to break the magic happening beneath the willow tree. He hadn't seen Ethan that calm in years, not since before his mother passed away. A storm of emotion swirled inside him: grief, relief, gratitude, fear. For the first time, he realized he might not have failed as completely as he believed. Maybe what his son needed wasn't another expert or test. Maybe he just needed someone who listened. Days turned into weeks. Emily's presence became part of Ethan's routine. They painted to music, built stories out of rhythm, and turned sounds into games. She learned his triggers, the tones that frightened him, the spaces that calmed him. And slowly, Ethan began to bloom like a flower that had finally found sunlight. The mansion, once filled with silence and tension, began to hum with laughter again. Staff whispered about the change. Jonathan smiled more. Even the housekeeper caught herself humming to tunes Ethan played on toy instruments Emily had brought, but not everyone was pleased. One evening, as Emily walked down the hall after a long session, she overheard 2 senior staff members whispering near the pantry. "She's just a maid," one hissed, "and now she's playing therapist. The boss is blinded by gratitude. She doesn't belong in that world." Emily's stomach tightened. She didn't confront them, she just walked away quietly. Words like those used to hurt her once. Now she had learned to let them pass. She wasn't here for approval. She was here for Ethan. That night, Jonathan called her to the study again. She entered nervously, remembering the last time she stood in that very spot. He looked up from his desk, smiling faintly. "You've done more for my son in 3 weeks than anyone has in 3 years. "I didn't do anything special," she said, blushing. "He did all the work." Jonathan leaned back, studying her with a mixture of admiration and confusion. "You have a gift, Emily, one I don't fully understand, but one I'm grateful for." He hesitated, then added, "There's something I need to ask you." Something personal. Her heart skipped. "What is it?" He looked down, almost embarrassed. "Would you consider staying?" "Permanently. Not as staff, as Ethan's therapist. Full-time, with proper pay and respect." Emily blinked in disbelief. "You want me to—" "Yes," he interrupted softly. "I want you to help me bring my son back. Not just for today, but for as long as he needs you." For a moment she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, her eyes glistened. This was more than a job, it was purpose rediscovered. A second chance she never thought she'd get. "I'd be honored," she whispered. Jonathan smiled, the first real smile she'd ever seen on his face. Then it settled. As she turned to leave, he added quietly, "Oh, and Emily," she looked back, "thank you for teaching me that sometimes the smallest voices carry the deepest truths." Outside, as the night breeze carried the faint sound of Ethan's laughter, Emily realized something profound. She had stepped into this mansion as a maid, unseen and unimportant, but she was leaving that room as something far greater, a voice that helped others find their own. Little did she know, the journey that lay ahead would test her heart in ways she could never imagine, and one secret buried deep within the Hayden family was about to change everything. Weeks melted into months, and the Hayden mansion slowly transformed from a silent palace into a home that breathed again. The laughter of a little boy echoed through its marble halls, carrying warmth to corners that had long been cold. And in the heart of it all was Emily, no longer just a maid or therapist, but a bridge between a father and his son. Every morning, Ethan waited by the window for her arrival. He would press his palms against the glass, eyes scanning the driveway until her small blue car appeared. The moment she stepped out, he'd race through the foyer, shouting her name, his voice stronger now, his smile brighter. For Jonathan, watching from his office upstairs, it was nothing short of a miracle. Emily's sessions with Ethan had become legend among the staff. She used music to teach him numbers, rhythm to help him speak, and stories to guide his emotions. The little boy who once hid from the world now painted, laughed, and sang softly to his toys. It was as if every melody had unlocked a new piece of his soul, but behind the joy, a shadow was growing. One afternoon, as Emily helped Ethan build a musical fort in the garden, she noticed a woman standing near the gate, elegant, composed, with eyes that carried the kind of pain only history could explain. The woman wore dark glasses and a long coat, though the weather was warm. She didn't move closer, didn't speak, just watched quietly as Ethan laughed. Emily felt an instinctive chill crawl up her spine. Something about the woman's presence didn't feel accidental. She opened her mouth to call out, but before she could, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into a waiting black car. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The image of those eyes haunted her, eyes that had looked both mournful and familiar. But from where? She pushed the thought aside, convincing herself she was overthinking. The next morning, Jonathan seemed distracted during breakfast. His usual calm demeanor was fractured by tension. When Emily asked if everything was all right, he hesitated before saying, "There's something I need to tell you. About Ethan, about his mother." The mention of Ethan's mother made Emily's heart still. She had never asked. It felt too personal, too sacred. "You don't have to," she said softly, but he shook his head. "You deserve to know," he replied, voice heavy. "Ethan's mother, Isabel, passed away 5 years ago. Car accident. She was extraordinary. The light of both our lives." He paused, eyes distant. "But there's something strange. Lately I've been getting letters, unsigned, postmarked locally. Someone claiming Isabel didn't die." Emily's eyes widened. "Did you tell the police?" "I did," Jonathan said. "They found nothing. No evidence, no leads. They said it was probably a cruel prank. But last night..." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I thought I saw her. Outside the gate," Emily's breath caught. "You saw her too?" His eyes snapped to hers. "You did?" She nodded slowly. "Yesterday afternoon. She was standing near the garden watching Ethan. Then she disappeared before I could reach her." Jonathan sank into a chair, his composure cracking for the first time. "Then it wasn't my imagination." For a moment, silence filled the study. The only sound was the soft ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Emily's mind raced. Could Isabel truly be alive? And if she was, why had she stayed hidden all this time? Jonathan stood pacing. If she's alive, why hasn't she come home? Why send letters instead of walking through that door? Emily hesitated. Maybe she can't. Maybe someone doesn't want her to. His eyes darkened. "What are you implying?" "Nothing certain," she said quickly. "But people don't vanish for 5 years and suddenly reappear without reason. Something's not right, Mr. Hayden." He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Then we find out." Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. A music box appeared in Ethan's room, one that played a lullaby Emily had never heard before. When she asked Ethan where it came from, he said, "The lady by the tree gave it to me. Her heart froze. The same willow tree where Isabel was last seen. Jonathan ordered security cameras installed around the property, but somehow the footage from that night went missing. The guards swore they didn't touch it. The air in the mansion shifted, from warmth to unease, from laughter to whispers, and through it all, Ethan began to change again. He started humming the tune from the music box at odd hours, the melody slow, haunting, almost mournful. Sometimes he would wake up crying, saying he heard someone singing it outside his window. Emily would comfort him until he fell asleep again, but deep down, fear gnawed at her. One evening she took the music box to her small cottage on the property. She wanted to study it. Maybe it would tell her something. As she turned the crank, the delicate tune filled the air, soft and eerie. But then she noticed something strange. Inside the lid, engraved in faint letters, were the words, "For E, Mummy loves you, always." Emily's throat tightened. She ran her fingers over the engraving, her heart aching. It was real. Isabel had left it, or someone wanted them to believe she had. The next day, Jonathan found her in the garden, staring at the willow tree. He looked exhausted, sleepless eyes, unbuttoned collar, a man unraveling. "I can't focus anymore," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her. Isabel, her reflection in the glass, her voice in Ethan's song." "Maybe she's trying to tell you something," Emily said quietly. "Something you missed," he shook his head. "I buried her, Emily. I stood by her grave." "Then who's sending the letters?" Jonathan didn't answer. Instead, he turned to her, his tone trembling between fear and desperation. "Help me find the truth," Emily nodded. "We'll do it together." That night, as thunder rolled across the horizon, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The mansion lights flickered, the wind howled through the hallways, and somewhere, faintly, the music box began to play on its own. Ethan woke up screaming. Emily rushed to his room, her heart pounding. She found him sitting on his bed, pointing to the window. "She's there," he cried. "Mommy's singing!" Emily turned toward the window, her breath catching in her throat. Outside, under the pale moonlight, a figure stood near the willow tree, her outline unmistakable, her posture graceful, her hair flowing in the wind. She raised a hand, as if waving. The music box melody echoed in the distance, wrapping around the night like a lullaby from another world. Emily couldn't move. Jonathan arrived seconds later, his face pale as he followed her gaze. The figure smiled faintly, and then vanished into the darkness. Jonathan ran outside, shouting Isabel's name into the storm. But when he reached the tree, there was no one there, only a single white flower resting on the roots, drenched in rain. Emily joined him, trembling. She picked up the flower, recognizing its scent instantly. Gardenia, Isabel's favorite. As lightning flashed across the sky, Jonathan whispered, "Either I'm losing my mind, or my wife never died." Emily stared at the willow tree, her heart pounding in her chest. "Or someone," she murmured, "doesn't want us to know the truth, and somewhere deep in the shadows beyond the fence." The woman in the dark coat watched them again, her eyes filled with secrets, her fingers clutching a worn photograph of a baby boy and a music therapist whose face she knew all too well. The storm raged until dawn. Rain lashed against the mansion's glass walls, thunder shaking its very foundation, but inside a different storm brewed. Jonathan sat by the fireplace, soaked and silent, a single gardenia resting in his trembling hands. Emily sat across from him, her mind spinning through every detail, every shadow that suddenly made sense in ways she didn't want to believe. "I saw her," Jonathan whispered, his voice cracking. "Not a dream, not a trick of the light. It was Isabel. I'd know that face anywhere." Emily swallowed hard. "Then she's alive," she said softly. "But if she's alive, why stay hidden all these years? Why watch from the shadows instead of coming home?" Jonathan's eyes glistened. "I don't know. Maybe she's afraid. Or maybe someone made her believe she had to disappear." Outside, dawn began to break, soft, fragile light painting the sky gold. Ethan slept upstairs, exhausted from the night's terror, clutching the music box to his chest like a shield. Emily rose and walked to the window, watching the willow tree sway in the wind, its long branches heavy with rain. That's when she noticed something glinting at the base of the tree. She stepped outside, her shoes sinking into the wet grass, and knelt to brush away the mud. There, half buried beneath the roots, was a small silver locket. She opened it carefully. Inside was a faded photograph of Isabel holding a newborn baby. And on the other side, engraved words, "For my son, and when the world is too loud. Listen to the music in your heart." Emily froze. Her hands shook. The words, the phrasing, she had heard them before. Years ago, during her internship at St. Mary's Rehabilitation Center, where she'd worked under a music therapy program for children with sensory disorders. A woman named Isabel had been there, fragile, beautiful and broken, clutching a locket just like this one. Emily rushed back inside, her heart pounding. "Jonathan," she said breathlessly, "your wife, Isabel, did she ever stay at St. Mary's Hospital?" Jonathan frowned. "Yes. After Ethan was born, she struggled with postpartum depression. She stayed there for treatment for a few months." "How do you know that?" Emily's breath hitched. "Because I worked there. I didn't know her name then. She only went by Belle, but I remember her. She used to hum lullabies, talk about her baby boy, who hated loud noises, who smiled only when she sang to him." Jonathan stood, stunned. "You knew her?" "I thought she'd recovered," Emily said, her voice trembling. "One day she just disappeared from the program. The doctor said her husband had taken her home. That was 5 years ago." Jonathan's face went pale. "But she never came home." They exchanged a look, realization dawning between them like a painful sunrise. Something terrible had happened. Isabel hadn't vanished by choice. Later that afternoon, Jonathan called his private investigator again. This time he demanded a full review of Isabel's case file, every hospital record, every police report. Hours passed before the investigator returned with a truth that shattered them both. "Sir," the man said through the phone, his tone uneasy, "your wife survived the accident, but she lost her memory. She was taken to a private mental health facility by her father before being reported deceased. He believed keeping her hidden would protect your family from scandal." Jonathan gripped the phone so hard, his knuckles went white. "He told me she was dead," he whispered, his voice breaking. "He made me bury an empty coffin." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He stole her life, and her son's chance to know her." The investigator continued. "She escaped from that facility 2 months ago. We've traced her movements. She's been living under a different name. And, sir, she's been visiting the mansion every night." Jonathan turned to Emily, realization cutting through his grief. "She's been here, watching us, watching Ethan." That night the mansion lights were dimmed. The rain had cleared, replaced by a heavy stillness that felt almost sacred. Jonathan and Emily waited in the garden near the willow tree. Hours passed, the moon climbing high above, until finally the sound of footsteps broke the silence. A figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked in moonlight. Isabel. Her face was thinner now, her eyes older, but her presence, it was unmistakable. When she saw Jonathan, she froze, tears spilling instantly down her cheeks. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're real." He stepped forward slowly, as if afraid she might disappear again. "So are you," he said softly. "You're alive," Isabel nodded weakly. "They told me you moved on, that you and Ethan didn't want to see me. I believed them. Until I saw you two together." Jonathan shook his head, emotion choking his voice. "I thought I lost you, Isabel. I mourned you every day. Why didn't you come back?" "I tried," she said, crying now. "But every time I got close, someone stopped me. I didn't even remember who I was for years. And when I finally did, I was terrified you wouldn't forgive me for leaving." Emily stood quietly beside them, her heart breaking for both. "He never stopped loving you," she said softly. "Neither did Ethan. He still dreams of you." At the mention of his name, Isabel's breath hitched. "My son, is he?" "He's safe," Jonathan said. "He's upstairs, sleeping. He's beautiful, Isabel. He's everything you wanted him to be." A sob escaped her lips. "Can I see him?" Jonathan nodded slowly, taking her trembling hand. He's been waiting for this moment his whole life. They walked together into the mansion. Emily followed behind, her heart pounding as they entered Ethan's room. The boy stirred, sensing their presence, and opened his eyes. When he saw Isabel standing there, he froze, confused, and then something deep inside him recognized her. "Mommy?" he whispered. Isabel fell to her knees beside the bed, tears streaming freely. "Yes, baby," she cried softly. "It's Mommy." Ethan reached out, touching her face with small, trembling hands, as if making sure she was real. Then he smiled, a quiet, radiant smile that melted every wall in the room. "You came back." "I'll never leave again," Isabel whispered, holding him close. The music box tune faintly playing in the background, like destiny itself had pressed its crank. Emily stood silently by the doorway, tears in her eyes. She had seen many moments of healing, but nothing like this. The room glowed with something beyond words, the reunion of souls long separated, the forgiveness of lost years. The following weeks brought change once again to the Hayden estate. Isabel began treatment with gentle support, slowly reclaiming pieces of herself. Jonathan, though haunted by betrayal and guilt, devoted himself to rebuilding their family. And through it all, Emily remained, guiding, nurturing, teaching them both how to move forward. One evening, as the sun set beyond the gardens, Isabel approached Emily on the terrace. "You saved my family," she said softly. "You gave my son his laughter back, and gave my husband hope again." Emily shook her head, smiling gently. "You all saved yourselves. I just asked someone to dance." Isabel laughed softly, tears in her eyes. "You have no idea how those words changed everything." Later that night, the three of them gathered beneath the willow tree. Jonathan, Isabel, and little Ethan. The boy twirled between them, giggling as the breeze played with his hair. "Dance with me, Mommy. Dance with me, Daddy." Jonathan took Isabel's hand, and together they began to sway beneath the moonlight. Their son between them, three souls healing through movement, through love, through music that had once only brought pain, but now carried freedom. Emily watched from the distance, her heart full. This was what she'd always believed in, that brokenness wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of transformation. Different didn't mean damaged. It meant beautiful in another language. As the night deepened, Jonathan turned to her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "You changed our lives, Emily. You reminded us what it means to see someone, really see them." She smiled, blinking back tears. "I didn't do anything special. I just listened." When she finally walked away from the garden that night, she looked back one last time, at the family now whole, the boy no longer hiding, the parents holding him close. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter, and a familiar phrase whispered through the trees. "Dance with me." Emily smiled and whispered back, "Always." And in that quiet moment beneath the silver moonlight, she knew the most extraordinary miracles often begin with the simplest act of kindness, seeing the unseen, hearing the unheard, and asking someone lost in silence to dance.